I declare our briefing session open at 6 p.m. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting today is being held on Wajak Noongar Buja, and I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I thank all past and present members of the community that have supported the city to better understand and value Noongar culture within the city of Wanneroo. Please note that the audio-visual proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. The broadcast of the proceedings of the meeting can be accessed live and on demand through the City of Wanneroo YouTube channel. Attendances are as per the record. We have Councillor Treby absent and we haven't had a notice of absence from Councillor Nguyen. Has he notified anyone of his absence this evening? His wife's not well? Okay, so we note his apology this evening. We have no deputations this evening, so I'll go straight to reports. Declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of which the interests are to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates. Declarations of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. And our first item tonight is Planning and Sustainability. Good evening, Mr Dixon.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. There are two items from the Planning and Sustainability Directorate on tonight's agenda. Both reports relate to the normalisation of old structure plans so that the zoning can be embedded into our scheme. This is part of our ongoing approach to simplifying our planning documents and making it easier for our local community to navigate the planning system. Mr Bowering and I would be happy to answer questions on either report, Mayor.
Thank you. Item 4.1, preparation of Amendment 206 to District Planning Scheme number 2. Do I have any questions? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just probably one or two questions, Mr Dixon. In the annex and the normalisation, as I say, we always agree with that. Happy to deal with that. I just want to ask a question. With the Hocking site, there's the Catholic Education Department that are rezoning that site to accommodate housing and some other uses. Does that get excluded from this process, or is that a separate process going forward?
Mr Bowering.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, it's excluded from this process. It will remain under the structure plan so that the structure plan will retain that flexibility. The proponent has just gone through a fairly long process of trying to get additional uses for commercial, a range of commercial uses fronting Wanneroo Road. So that land, including the residential development that will occur to the east of that, will remain in the structure plan until that's constructed, and then we'll normalise it at a later date.
Thank you, Mr Bowering. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And the other question is, up off of East Rose, right up the back near Lenore Road, is on the Pearsall boundary, is the other lot, which is currently a farm that's in operation. That's currently obviously under the existing planning, but it's still a farm. It's obviously not yet ready to be urbanised. How does that get affected under this proposal?
Mr Bowering.
Thank you. In the same way, it will not be part of the this normalisation process. It will remain under the structure plan, which will provide the subdivision framework for it. And if they choose to change that or want to modify the structure plan, it leaves that option open for them down the track if they want to look at a more flexible or different design.
Thank you, Mr Bowering. Councillor Civic, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just briefly on that, the reason for that would be because it's part of Cell 4 and it's also part of the developer contributions process. Is that what that would be for? Yep.
Mr Bowering or Mr Dixon?
That is correct, Councillor Sabin.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Does anyone have another question on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, we go to 4.2, preparation of amendment number 210 to District Planning Scheme number 2, revocation of Clarkson, Lot 16, Connolly Drive, agreed structure plan number 33. Do we have any questions on this item? If there are no questions on this item, thank you very much. We move to assets. Please note that we have confidential documents on both of the items on assets this evening, and if we need to discuss those confidential items, we will have to go behind closed doors. Mr Singh, would you like to speak to any of the items?
Thank you, Mayor. We got 2 items on the agenda from Assets Directorate tonight. I'm happy to take questions on either of them.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do I have any questions on item 4.3, tender for the Yanship Lagoon kiosk upgrade? Yes, Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I did miss it somewhere in the agenda, but when this is approved, when will the work start?
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, we're looking at starting the works around next month, depending upon the finalising the contract documents.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. The only question I have for Mr Singh is, and I didn't see it, is there going to be any temporary coffee shop in that location, bearing in mind we have no other coffee shop in that area? So is the city going to sort of have a pop-up coffee shop somewhere?
Mr Singh, I understood that the tenant is still going to be operating from that site through temporary facilities. Is that correct, Mr Singh?
Yes, Mayor, that's correct. That's mentioned on page 72 and 73 of the agenda documents. There will be a temporary facility provided through that arrangement.
Mr Singh, are there any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we go to item 4.4, tender 23072, provision of streetscapes maintenance south. Are there any questions on this item? If there are no questions on this item, we go to community and place. Thank you, Mr Clem and Mr Stowitz. Mr Clem, are there any items you'd like to speak to under your department tonight?
Thank you, Mayor. There's 2 items on the committee in place agenda tonight. We won't introduce either item, but I'm happy to take questions on the first item, and Mr Starwatts can take questions on the second item.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on item 4.5, Department of Local Government, Sports and Cultural Industries 2024-25 funding round? Yes, Councillor Rowe, thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one question to Mr Clem. The report mentions Montrose club rooms in there, and it talks about the fact that it was constructed in 1981. It says it's no longer fit for purpose. Can you confirm whether in its current state it is compliant with all of the requirements, noting that the report mentions there's no hot water facilities at those club rooms, even though it's used by the user groups?
Thank you. Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. So the building met all the compliance requirements at the time it was constructed. It doesn't meet contemporary standards. So as we go through a refurbishment process with it, we do need to bring it up to those contemporary standards.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question goes to the PR 4277. So on page 83, administration wants us to apply for $2.5 million in grants for the Alkimos Aquatic Recreation Centre. But I found that when, if you go down to your report, in your report, it talks about items on page 86 in terms of an assessment of a project identified in the grant round. It talks about not being able to, because you've listed all of the dot points on how you can actually get funding and what is not eligible for funding. And I noticed that it says in there, for part of it, I need to find my way again, but it talks about the projects that have already received state government funding and are seeking an additional grant to meet cost increases is not something you can apply for. So that's the third dot point up from the bottom of that. So is that in case, I would hate for us to lose out on other funding for other purposes if we've got the wrong grant application.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. So in our discussions with the department around future additional funding or possible additional funding for the Alkimos Aquatic and Recreation Centre project, they have suggested that we consider an application to CSRFF. So that is what we're doing. I think that statement regarding projects that have already received state government funding and are seeking an additional grant to meet cost increases probably relates more to if they've previously received CSRFF funding and are coming back a second time.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll go to Place Activation 4.6, disbandment of the East Wanneroo Community Reference Group. Are there any questions to this item? If there are no questions, that ends Community in Place. Thank you. We now go to Corporate Strategy and Performance. Thank you, Mr Greer. Are there any items you wish to speak to this evening?
Thank you, Mayor. There are 4 items on the agenda tonight, 2 from Finance and 2 from Property Services. I don't propose to introduce any of those, but I'm happy to take questions if required.
Thank you, Mr Greer. If we go, the first item, 4.7, Business and Finance, a financial activity statement for the period ended the 31st of July. Do we have any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one for me that will probably go to Mr Singh. I've noticed on page 1115 to 117, which is the top capital project works, there's a couple of items on there that have slipped off from the list. It's been quite heavily updated from last month, which is awesome. The ones that have slipped off are obviously in my ward, so I just wanted to check if they meant to be on there.
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The top projects are actually linked with financial year budgets. So given that this report is for July month financial activity statement, you're seeing the projects which have been selected for 23-24 financial year as top projects. So this report only is mentioning those ones, not the last year ones. The last year ones, I think a couple of projects which my understanding is you may be referring to is Alexander Drive footpath. We had some issues with third-party approvals and getting quotes from Western Power. So given that there's a high risk of that project not being delivered on time, that's not been listed as a top project this financial year. The other one, which I think you may have mentioned before, was a Vangara CCTV. That one was a top project last financial year. It is about to finish. There have been again some delays with Western Power connections and some supply chain issues. So that was an update provided to council members. I think that will be completed in the next couple of months.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any other questions to this item? There are no more questions to this item. We move to transactional finance, item 4.8, warrant of payments. Are there any questions about the warrant of payments? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make note of at the end of some of the pages, the descriptions are not being listed. So a couple to note on the bottom of page 120, we've got Telstra Limited, and then we've got page 129 and 130, and there are a few others as well. It just always is helpful to have the descriptions just to get a bit of extra information. So could we check the bottom items and make sure the descriptions are there? And I don't know if that's a formatting thing or anything. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. We can organise that for the council report for next week, can't we, Mr Greer?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It just appears that the row has broken across the page, so I think it's just a matter of moving it down. Just looking at the Telstra one, the narrative is on the next page. So we can have a look at that and tidy that up.
Thank you, Mr Greer. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question, for which I did give some notice to the CEO, on page 120, near the bottom item, transaction 124231, it says City of Wanneroo cash advance for the Wodjuk knowledge holder on-site workers monitor for the Yanship Dog Beach, $1,100. Can I just ask two questions? One, obviously, administration probably doesn't like to deal with cash upfront payments. I'd like to understand how that is going to proceed going forward. And my second part of the question, is this under the Act that the state government has just repealed?
Mr Greer. Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on answering the second question first, the payment has been made to the knowledge holders for the assistance they are giving us for the approval we received under the previous Act back in February 2023. Regarding the cash payments, that's the only mode of payment they would accept, but we are working with them to establish a process where we can make payments in future electronically.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Are there any other questions on the warrant of payments? Councillor Berry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On page 171, I've just got a query with the microchip implantation for dogs, one attendee ranger. Are rangers now doing microchips for dogs, or is this to learn how to read them effectively? Thank you.
We'll take that one on notice. Thank you, Councillor Berry. Any other questions on the warrant of payments? If there are no other questions on the warrant of payments, we move to property services, proposed Rose Reserve closure portions of Celeste Street, Eglinton. Do we have any questions on that item? If there are no questions on that item, we move to the next item, which is item 410, proposed excision and dedication, part of lot 9943 in brackets 310 Flynn Drive, Neerabup as road reserve. Do we have any questions on that item? If there are no questions on that item, thank you, gentlemen. And we move to the Chief Executive Office and Advocacy and Development. Thank you, Mr Marmion.
Thank you, Mayor. There are 4 items under the CEO's office this evening. 4.11, the Advocacy Plan. 4.12, the Enterprise Funding Policy Review. 4.13, the Sponsorship Agreement with Core Innovation. And 4.14, the Chief Executive Officer Recruitment Process Certification. We would be happy to take questions on all the reports, but Mr Marmion would like to introduce 4.13 relating to the Automotive and Robotics Precinct and Council's offer to become a principal sponsor in that amazing facility.
Thank you, Mr Marmion.
Thank you, Mayor Aiken, and good evening, council members. So report 4.13 is for council to consider entering into a 1-year sponsorship agreement with Core Innovation Hub with a total value of $60,000, including $50,000 in cash or electronic payment and $10,000 in kind support. A Core Innovation Hub has been engaged by Development WA to manage and operate the Australian Automation and Robotics Precinct, or the ARP, in Neerabup. The City has an opportunity to collaborate with Core on the activation of the ARP through a proposed founding partner sponsorship agreement in alignment with the City's sponsorship policy. I had the opportunity to attend an open day held yesterday at the ARP with 4 companies demonstrating products on site to a group of about 40 industry representatives. The companies attending range from ASX-listed miners to local Perth innovators and included Imdex, Caterpillar, Hatch, Rio Tinto, BHP, Woodside, Metal Gear Industries, Robotics Australia Group and Schneider Electric, so quite an impressive list, and that's just a snapshot of them. The ARP is already attracting interest from global companies and innovators, and it makes sense for the City to ensure that appropriate support is provided to these investors, as well as securing opportunities for local businesses and innovators to investigate and explore robotics and automation as a productivity improvement option. The proposed 1-year sponsorship agreement will be a catalyst for employment generation, investment attraction, and will demonstrate the City's commitment to leadership in innovation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Do we have any questions on this item? No, we don't. Okay, item 411. Do we have any questions on the Advocacy Plan 2023-2032? Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor, and I note the proposal to include the Girraween Hub as part of the advocacy plan. Just a question to the city, potentially to the CEO. Have the local members been made aware of the master plan coming to an end? And in principle, they are supportive of the city's intentions to redevelop that project.
Thank you. Mr Sim.
Certainly, both at a state and federal level, both members have been updated, but the final update will come post next week's resolution of council.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item, councillors? If there are no more questions, we go to the Enterprise Funding Policy Review. Are there any questions on item 4.12? If there are no questions on that, we now go to item 4.14, noting that there is a confidential attachment, and if there are any questions on the confidential attachment, we will have to go behind closed doors. And so that's the Chief Executive Officer Recruitment Process Certification. Do we have any questions on that item? So there are no questions on that item. Item 5 of motions on Lotus, 5.1, a City of Wanneroo transactional banking arrangements. Motion on notice is going to be given to us next week by Councillor Miles. And would you like to speak to that, Mr Sim?
Thank you, Mayor. With your permission, can I just seek advice from the Manager of Council and Corporate Support whether we are in receipt of any other notice of motions to be considered at next Tuesday's ordinary council meeting?
Thank you, Ms Cope. Oh, Ms Smart.
In terms of a motion on notice, no, we haven't received any at this point in time.
Thank you, Ms Smart. Councillor Huntley.
Madam Mayor, at the moment I have a notice of motion in place, but we'll have to confirm whether that will continue to next week or not.
Okay, have you advised Ms Smart about this?
Yep, I have the team phoned me this morning and we'll be speaking to the CEO this week.
Okay, thank you. You happy with that, Mr CEO?
Subject to Councillor Huntley being able to confirm the wording of the resolution before the conclusion of this evening, that will meet the requirements of the standing orders. Otherwise, we'll be outside it and it'll have to be considered at the October ordinary council meeting.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Okay, item 8, confidential. We will now move to confidential session to discuss items 8.1 and 8.2. And before we do that, Mr CEO needs to declare an interest.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to declare a financial interest in item 8.2, CEO Annual Performance Review. The nature of my financial interest is the matter relates to the employment contract I hold with the City of Wanneroo. And I will leave the chambers.
Thank you. We'll do that second. Maybe we'll do item 8.1 first. Thank you. We now go to item 9, the date of the next meeting. The next ordinary council meeting has been scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 12th of September 2023, and it will be held at Council Chambers, Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. Thank you for your attendance, councillors, and I now declare the briefing session closed at 6:31 p.m. Thank you.